All right, good to go.
Excellent. Should I introduce you?
Sure.
So everyone, I'm Christina, half of One Woman Shop, and this is Sarah, the guest of honor, and the other half of One Woman Shop. And today I am going to be asking her a lot of questions about her background, some of which I know and a lot of which I probably don't know. And so if anyone has any questions for Sarah, go ahead and type it in the chat box here to the right. Which right now just says Coach Jenny a lot. So type any questions there, and it's just /question and then type your question. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay,
yep,
awesome. / Perfect. And then if anyone wants to eventually join us in the seat and ask Sarah a question live while they're on video, we'll open up the seat later. But I'm going to block it right now so no one can join us. So Sarah, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you? I like how for those of you that weren't on the call when Christina joined, her salsa music came on when she put her headphones on.
It's like hardcore rap salsa. It's awesome. The best of both genres. So, Sarah, are you nervous that I'm going to be harsh on you?
Well, I did just send you a message saying, take it easy, please.
I saw.
No, I have no idea what to expect, but I'm excited.
So, well, why don't we just jump in? So, once upon a time, a girl named Sarah was born, and spoiler alert, her name was not Sarah Frandina. And I know this because I met her not as Sarah Frandina. But Sarah, if you just want to tell us like a little bit about like seriously where you were born and the early years.
Yeah, sure. So that's a good point because it's almost 2 years since I became Sarah Frandina, but my maiden name is Sarah Paduano. So I went from one very Italian name to another very Italian name. But I was born in Buffalo, New York, and I haven't traveled far in terms of where I've lived because I went to college in Rochester, New York, and now I'm still in Rochester, New York. So I'm a full hour and 15 minutes away from home. But yeah, early years, let's see. So last week we talked to Christina, and I think like we had very different schooling history because you moved around a lot. You had some homeschooling interspersed there. I went to the same school with the same kids for way too long. But it was great because it's a totally different atmosphere, but I had just a seriously awesome upbringing. I have one older brother, and he's 5 years older than me, which in some phases of life is awesome. In some phases of life was not awesome. But like not my hobbies honestly haven't changed much since I was 5 years old. I still like to play tennis. I still like to read a lot. I still like to write. I still like nothing really changed, I guess. Maybe the only thing is that I can be away from my mom for more than 30 minutes at a time.
Good work.
Yeah.
Very grown up of you. Okay, wait. This is going to be maybe jumping way ahead, but your favorite hobby of mine has to do with the newspaper because it's the nerdiest thing ever. It's amazing. Can you just say that real quick, even though it has nothing to do with your childhood?
Oh, yeah. No, I actually read the newspaper with a red pen, and sometimes it's a red Sharpie, but that bleeds through, so I try to stick to red pen.
Fair.
But that started since I was little, when I realized that books in print could actually have typos. It was like, how is this possible? And then I started reading the newspaper at a certain point in my life, and I've carried the tradition on since with the red pen.
I love it. So I don't know if any of you were at our OWS chat a few months ago, and we always do like a fun introduction. So we're like, what's your name? Where are you from? What's your business? And we always do like one fun fact. And so our fun fact was like, what's your secret or not so secret nerdy habit? And so I loved when Sarah put that. And everything Harry Potter, right?
Oh, yeah. Always.
Yeah. Okay. But that's late. That's the later years. Okay. So you go to a public school or private school?
Public.
Okay, cool. And then you guys see my mom's in the background. I can't wait to be away from my mom for more than 30 minutes, apparently. And so I'm curious about how you made the decision to go to RIT.
Yes.
And how you decided what to major in.
Well, so that's funny because I was actually, I'm not saying this to brag by any means. I was valedictorian at my high school, and so everybody expected that I would go to school for like math or science or engineering. And I was just like so done with being like the studious person who just does like the standard subjects. So I'm looking at colleges, and I applied to, I don't know, like 15 schools just for the hell of it. And I went to like this, I forget what it was called, like Colleges and Careers Weekend at RIT. And I don't even know how it came across my radar, but a friend and I, who was living in Minnesota at the time, she had moved away when I was 15, but was visiting for the summer. We drove to RIT and stayed for the weekend, and I just fell in love with it. And it could literally be because it was the first college campus I had spent like a Friday and Saturday night on, but it was just so, I loved the community around it. I loved the people I met. I loved the campus itself. So I started looking at what RIT was really known for.
Yeah.
And it's an engineering school. So I'm like, well, shoot, that's not what I want to do. And then I found out that they had one of the best film schools in the country. And I was like, I really like the idea of getting into film and animation. I had actually been on a couple of video shoots at Fisher-Price because my cousin at the time was a lead animator there. And so I had like this slight interest. I did an internship in high school with a film company in Buffalo. And so I ended up enrolling at RIT for film and animation. And then, I don't know if you want me to go right into where that led, because it was not a straight path.
Yeah, well, we love paths. Oh, sorry, I'm hearing a bad echo. But yeah, no, go for it.
Yeah, so my freshman year, I was there for film and animation, and I played tennis, and that's like a huge part of college for me because that's where I met all of my best friends. And then I ended up like basically every friend I had at RIT was somehow related to sports. But I was in film and animation, and I really wanted to just take the animation track. And I got about a year through, and I was like, this is not what I can see myself doing for life, because I was in 3D animation labs around the clock. I was sleeping about 3 to 4 hours a night between tennis and other extracurriculars, and then all my classes and homework and projects. And I'm the type of person that, as you know, is an extreme perfectionist. And that was a discipline where nothing is ever perfect. In animation, there's always something that can be improved. And so that's why I didn't sleep, because it was always just like, if the project's due at 9, I'm working on it until 8:59. So I kind of just saw that I really liked doing it, but to be an animator, you had to be top tier to get a job with some of the big companies. And I just didn't see myself pushing for that. So I backed out a little bit and switched over to marketing and advertising. I was also missing writing. I've always been a writer. And so I got into marketing and advertising, and literally because the schedule didn't work out how I wanted it to, so that I couldn't go and study abroad in Italy, I actually switched into multidisciplinary studies, which my friends will tell you is like a create your own major. Now, had I have known about this option from the beginning, I probably would have done it, because what it allowed me to do for the following 2 years was keep my film and animation going. So I took a few more classes in each, and then there were 4 parts of it. The other side of it was marketing and PR. And then I got a writing certificate. So it was just like, I was able to do all these things and still get a minor in Italian and study in Italy for a semester. So it was just like, I couldn't go wrong. And now it's just funny because I go to start my own business, and I'm like, I'm not really pulling from any of those. My writing certificate was in PR writing. Now I'm a copywriter. And so I'm just like, I probably, you look back and you're like, some people think like your degree really sets you on a path. And I'm just like, no, my degree showed me that I'm never going to be on a straight and narrow path, and that it's okay to have a ton of different passions.
Yeah. Well, multi-passionate. No, I love that. And so I don't want to get too far off track, but I know you have a post that you're working on about like what different jobs have taught you. And I think that same lesson can be applied to your different career or your different classes and your different paths that you take within school. So you kind of touched on it, but if you can just kind of maybe detail a little bit more the things that you learned. And okay, so first I'm curious, you said if you had found this major earlier, you would have done it. Do you regret that? Are you the kind of person who is like, oh, like there's no point in having regrets because it all leads you on the path you're on now? Or are you like, no, I kind of wish I'd really.
Yeah, that's a good point because the minute I said that, it was like, if I had known about that option at first, I don't think I would have taken it. And I am really happy that I took the path I did, mainly because of the people I met along the way and the fact that it showed me what I didn't want to do in the life I didn't want to live. And so I am one of those people who thinks that everything you've done will get you to the point that you're at, and it all leads to that. And I hate saying this, but everything happens for a reason, and I really do believe that. And that's not to say that in a woo sense, because I also think it takes a lot of work, and there were a lot of ups and downs. But I do think that looking back, it's like, I wouldn't change that. I learned so much being a film student, and there's nothing to me more terrifying than walking into a place with an old Bolex camera and a light meter and asking if you can film something. And I did that for a year. So it was just like these experiences that I never would have gotten any other way. And that's exactly how I look at it for all the jobs I've been through, where it's just like, as long as you can take something away from every experience, it's going to lend itself later to help you out.
And there's a post that we'll link to once it's live. Yeah, I think that's a great point. So I'm curious, jumping back a little bit more to when you were like, I was just sick of being the number one student. I was just sick of being kind of, I guess, an overachiever. Can you just talk a little bit more about that and how you feel like that plays in to life right now?
Yeah, no, that's, I haven't actually thought about that in a long time, but for a while it really was like, I think it was about the expectation. So, I was always a good student. I knew how to read before I went to preschool because my brother was 5 years older than me, and I was jealous that he got to do all these things. So I was at home getting taught all the same things. So, in first grade, I'm going to the kindergarten class and I'm reading to them. But so it just set me on this path of like constantly being this overachiever. But then when I got to high school, I knew I was going to go for gold and, stay at the top of the class. It was like, why not? Right. But it was also like everybody felt like they were going to determine my path for me. Like, you're going to go to school in Buffalo, you are going to study engineering, and you're going to make a ton of money. And I'm looking at that and I'm just like, it actually pissed me off when I was voted most likely to succeed, because it was like, could it be any more textbook? Like, it was just, I don't know. So I looked at that and I was just like, I don't want to fit into any buckets. Part of me wanted to go really extreme and like completely leave the country and go away to school. But it was just like, again, that would be like doing something to somebody else's expectation. So I was just, the minute I left and I went to RIT, I knew it was the right decision. And then really, it was my study abroad that kind of taught me that I can get completely out of the country. I can be away from friends and family. I can explore other cultures and really learn from that. And so it's like, ever since then, I still think this plays in where a lot of times in my business, I do stuff because of other people's expectations. And we talk about this all the time, not saying you should do something, because
right.
Business isn't one size fits all. But I still feel like it's that same feeling of like, well, this is what people expect, and trying to get away from that. So it definitely still plays in all the time.
So I'm curious if you mentioned like when you got voted most likely to succeed, that was probably like a little epiphany moment. But the rest of the time, was it these like ongoing realization, or was it like a one-time like, holy crap, like I don't want to lead this life that everyone expects from me? I'm just curious because I think that other people probably have had those moments, or they've had one moment. And so I'm just kind of curious how you really recognized it.
I think that, so it was definitely not anything like an epiphany until when I was 15, my parents divorced and my best friend moved to Minnesota. And those two things really rocked me. My brother was in college, so he wasn't living at home. And suddenly I just felt like, all right, I got to figure shit out on my own for the first time ever. And so at that moment, I think that's what, it wasn't necessarily when I said like, oh, I don't want to live to other people's expectations and I don't want to do this, that, or the other thing. It was mostly that it was just like my brain turned on where I was like, I not only have to be smart in school now, I have to be really smart in life. And from that moment on, it was just like, I'm going to make my own decisions. I'm just going to move forward at my own pace. And then ever since then, I think it's really been gradual, to be honest.
I'm so sorry. I'm getting so distracted. Somebody said, we look like sisters. We've never gotten that. And Sarah, quote, you are so cute.
Well, I actually did my hair today, so that's one thing.
That is awesome. Some positive reinforcement for you.
Thanks.
So yeah, I just find this really interesting, and I'm dying laughing because I was pulled out of, I think in kindergarten or first grade, I was pulled out to tutor some kid in the hallway in math, and we're just like, you and I are just such nerds, like since the beginning. But I find it really interesting. Obviously we've had very different backgrounds, but I find it interesting the way our paths have been like, we both kind of had these epiphanies, like, sure, we could be CEOs, and that sounds really arrogant, but like we could be CEOs and sit in a corner office, but like we both kind of realized independently, like, that's not what we want. Like we don't necessarily want to be on this, in the rat race and all the other cliches about American lifestyle. Obviously nothing wrong with American lifestyle, but just like striving for money and power. And it just, I think we both realize it doesn't really satisfy us, right?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that.
Yeah. So speaking of that, I'm really curious to talk more about the study abroad and kind of biggest takeaways from that. And then maybe just some advice for people who maybe didn't have a chance to study abroad or didn't choose to, and how they can kind of incorporate travel in their current lives, because they know that you do.
Yeah, no. And I think you can speak to this really well too. But so I studied abroad my junior year of college. So it was the summer after. And I went into a full immersion program because I had been studying Italian, the language, for a year. And so it wasn't like a standard study abroad where you go to a campus there and you're intermingling with Italian students. It was a group of us that went and we studied at a school for the Italian language, and then we worked. So we went to school in the morning, and then we actually interned in the afternoon, and we all had different internships. So really, there were a couple of things about that. The first is that it's literally the first time I'd ever been away from my family for that long and that far away. And I did not have consistent communication with them. So that was like, I think I was terrified the day I left, because even when I went away to school, it was like, well, I'm an hour and 15 minutes away. I can pick up the phone. I can get in the car. This was the first time I was really going to be away from them. That was the first step of like, this is a life-changing thing. The second thing was that at this point, I'm like a year away from graduating college, and I know I don't want to necessarily go back to Buffalo where all of my family is. But I'm like, do I want to stay in Rochester? I know a lot of my friends from college are going to be leaving. Mm-hmm. So I was really overwhelmed with this just where do you go? How do you pick one place to live? Like that just absolutely drove me up a wall. Like, how does anybody choose where they're going to settle down? And so getting out and actually going to Italy was like, it was this eye opener that you don't have to choose. And you can set up a home base, but always go explore. And that's really what it taught me, is that there's no reason that I have to stay in one place forever. And yes, it's really nice to have a home base. I love coming home. Every time I go away, it's always the best feeling to come home. But it's always nice to know that you can get out and explore. And from that, I've learned, just from Italy alone, that was like my first big international travel experience, that I grow so much every time I've went away. So after that, I think 2 summers after that, I went to Greece and I went to Germany. Right after Italy, I went over to Slovenia for 2 weeks. Since then, I've been, to Ireland, Belize, Australia, New Zealand. And each time it's just like, it's such a fantastic learning opportunity. Now, I know you did not study abroad, which surprised me last week when I had you in the hot seat. So when it comes to like, if you have not studied abroad and incorporating travel into your life, it's never too late. Like, that's the biggest thing, is that yes, the study abroad was awesome because we basically had other people planning our itinerary for most of it. And we were really ingrained in the culture. We lived in a house. We went to a school. We worked in the community. So it is a completely different experience, yes. But there's no reason that once you've graduated college or once you've started working, you can't still have those experiences.
Absolutely. And obviously, if you follow anything on the site, you know we do a ton with location independence. But we also did a post that was basically, even, you know, we talk all the time, business isn't one size fits all, life isn't one size fits all, but we're also like location independence isn't one size fits all. And so like I, you know, live in Guatemala, but Sara has a home base in the States and then travels outside of that. So one of my questions for you in terms of travel, it's not so much about your background, but just more advice, is one thing I struggled with in the past when I would go on these life-changing trips and I would come back, and then within a few weeks, I just kind of felt like I was back to just my routine. And so do you have any advice for people who, you know, maybe have these huge life-changing trips or journeys, adventures, and then they're like, okay, I'm back in my normal life. Like, how do I keep that alive?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question, because I think we've even talked about this with you just coming back to the States for a brief moment where you run into people and you want to be like, wait, but I was just in Guatemala for 6 months. I lived there. You know, it
changed me.
Yes. When I got back from Italy, I think I told you this, I ran into a friend at a grocery store that I hadn't seen since high school. And it was like the day after I got back. And I just wanted to be like, wait, but I was just in Italy for 8 weeks, but that had no relevance to our conversation. So it was just like this feeling of when you come back, you not only want people to know, but you just want it to still be a part of your life.
Right.
So it's definitely something that at first, I don't know that I really intentionally did anything. But now, you know, for me, it's writing. And so the whole time I'm traveling, I used to keep a really, really great journal. But honestly, since I've started traveling with my husband, Pete, there's not as much time to write because he is super, super active. Before I traveled with Pete, I traveled with friends who also were big advocates of naps, journaling, and reading. So it was like no matter where we were always taking some breaks. But keeping that journal really helps in terms of going back and reflecting on it. But now it's more or less like as I'm traveling, especially through New Zealand and Australia, making note of things that I've noticed, things that I've learned, people I've interacted with, stories that I've heard, and then somehow integrating them into my writing in the future. And I have not done that fully by any means. But that's really how I plan to do it. For other people, it might be different. You know, I have a friend that creates these really elaborate photo books. And so for that, it's still like preserving a memory, not so much integrating it into your daily life. But I think as bloggers and business owners, there's so much potential for us to take the lessons we've learned and work them in.
Absolutely. One thing I like to do, I love to cook. And so after I went to Israel, I was like, oh my God, my eyes have been opened. And, but one thing I did is I would cook shakshuka, which is like an Israeli breakfast. And that was, for me, the food was a really cool way to stay connected to the culture.
That is a great point and a great idea too.
Well, and I don't know if you ever have this, and obviously our whole lives revolve around technology. Like we don't know each other. We wouldn't run this business if it weren't for technology. But one thing that I always, every time I go on a trip, I'm like, wow, it is so nice to be away from my phone for a while.
Yes.
And so do you have those little
moments? It's like, I think at first it's like one of the biggest stressors is knowing that you are going to be disconnected on those trips where you do have to disconnect. But then once you're there, it's one of the most enjoyable parts. So every year I go to a beach in Canada, which is actually only, from where I grew up in Buffalo, it's only an hour away. But because it's Canada, I can't use my phone there. I can't use data. They don't have Wi-Fi. It's like this really little cottage community where I won't even tell you about the plumbing. So, just for that week alone, I panic every time before I'm leaving because I'm like, I'm going to be away from email for a week, away from work for a week. And every time I've gotten there, it has been the most relaxing week ever. Now, on trips where you do have the option to check in, so when I went to Belize or Australia, New Zealand, where, you know, cafes have Wi-Fi, hotels have Wi-Fi. We stayed in Airbnbs, homes have Wi-Fi. I just made like a really conscious effort to not be glued to my phone. And mostly because a lot of times it's who I'm traveling with and I want to be really fair to them.
Yeah.
But also because when you're there, you really should be paying, and I don't want to say should, but you get the most out of it if you are immersing yourself in the culture and the experiences. And there's nothing wrong with doing quick check-ins here and there. But for me, it's just a matter of once I've turned on, I find that it very hard to turn off. So it's better if I just don't turn on.
But then I think once you're like, say you're away for 5 days, on the 5th day, you're like, wow, this is so, not that your life back home isn't important and not that your emails aren't important, but you're like, wow, this is really just not that significant in like the grand scheme of life. And I think it gives you this like, this new outlook. You're like, oh yeah, like this is not the end of the world.
Yeah, no, and it really is, because before I left for New Zealand and Australia, we had talked about this trip for a year. It was actually supposed to be our honeymoon, but it was just like this massive trip, and we were like, we need more time. And then we ended up planning it in the 3 weeks before we left anyway. But like, it was probably November of last year, like almost around this time, a few weeks from now, when I started reaching out to all my clients and saying, you know, there's a very good chance we'll be doing this trip. We'll be away for 6 weeks. I would like to get ahead and do all of the January and February work in November and December, if possible. Are you willing to work with me on that? Mm-hmm. Every single one of them was just so excited that I was doing this. And they were absolutely willing to work with me. It was, in my eyes, it was incredible, because I'm like, they're paying me, and here I'm asking them to make these considerations and these changes. Mm-hmm. But to them, it was no big deal at all. I was still going to do the work. I was still going to get ahead on it. And so that was like, you know, that was my first clue that like nothing is as big of a deal as we think it is. And then, you know, the beauty of One Woman Shop is one of us can step away for a week, a month, whatever it needs to be. And there's another one of us to pick up the slack.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I want to really, I have so much more to learn about your background, and I don't want to get too distracted. So if I can just, unless you have more to talk about on the travel side of things, but otherwise, I really want to know. So you graduate college. We have to go way back. Okay, we're still at like your graduation. So you graduate college. You've had all these epiphanies about perfectionism. Where are you now?
Oh, man. Okay. So
after college.
So my last year of RIT, I actually took all my classes online and worked full-time in the sports information office, which was awesome. I did a ton of sports writing, and then I was pretty much at every sporting event taking stats. So I got like, you know, the data nerd, but also a ton of writing experience. But I actually graduated early. So I finished, RIT at the time was on quarter systems. So the second quarter finished in February. So I had one class to take. It was going to be online for the spring. So I got an internship or a co-op because it's actually paid and it's college credit in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So February of 2009, I moved down to Allentown, Pennsylvania for a 10-week internship. It was amazing. I like settled right in. I got a house with two other girls that I just met. One of them ends up being like one of my best friends now. And I worked down there, and I really loved the area. And so I came back to graduate to walk in May. And then I actually went back down there and worked for the summer while I was looking for other jobs in Buffalo and Rochester in the sports arena. So I ended up staying down there until August. And that was like, you know, that was a corporate job. It was for a retail energy company, but it was in marketing. I was working with really fantastic people. I loved the culture. I loved the area. But they weren't looking for somebody full time. So I ended up getting this an assistantship at St. John Fisher College, which is another college in Rochester. And that's how I got back into sports. So they paid for my graduate degree, and I worked full-time in sports management. Of course, at that time, the company in Allentown offers me a full-time job as soon as I'm leaving, right? So that was also another point where it was like, I could stay, I could make really good money and have this corporate job, or I could go back and get my degree and work in sports, be closer to home. Pete had not moved down to, my husband now, had not moved down to Allentown. He was still in Buffalo.
Okay.
So I did come back to Rochester, and again, it's like, I know now that was absolutely the best move. So for the next 2 years, I was working at Fisher and doing my MBA. And so that was a two-year assistantship. So I can keep going if you want.
Yeah, no, I didn't know about the MBA for a while. And so I'm really curious to talk about that.
Yeah. No, you know, I think I did the MBA because it was part of that package. I wasn't necessarily looking to go back to school by any means. I had just graduated. Now, of course, I'm glad I did it because I think if I had gotten any further away from college, I would not have gone back. But in hindsight, you know, I look at what I'm doing now, running a copywriting business and co-running One Woman Shop, and I'm just like, these experiences are 10 times better than an MBA. I don't necessarily know that much of my MBA relates to what I'm doing now. I think in a lot of cases, it taught me, again, what I don't want to be doing. But I've learned so much more just by actually getting into the thick of things and running a business.
It's interesting you say that because I'm like, I like school and I want to get an MBA, but I can't justify it. Like nobody, like when we talk to coaching clients, not a single person is like, did you get an MBA? Not to say that it doesn't have value, obviously, but
yeah. No, and I completely agree. And I think today, it depends obviously where you go, but MBAs might be way more applicable. But when I was there and I went from 2009 to 2012, they were still kind of ingrained in really traditional stuff. We didn't take any classes that had anything to do with running an online business, digital marketing, social media. And so it just felt really old school, and I still appreciate, and that's why like I talk about it, and I still appreciate some of the hard skills I learned and some of the soft skills. Like I love talking about leadership, for example. That stuff's not going to change. Yeah. But it's definitely, you know, a lot of it was just like, I'm never going to use this.
So, sorry, can you hear an echo?
Yeah, sometimes.
Strange. Okay. Well, I'll continue. So I'm curious, again, back to this question of it's tricky because every experience teaches you kind of what you don't want. And I guess having an MBA, like you always have an MBA, right? And so if things change in the future, then you have those pretty awesome initials. But going back, would you do it again?
You know, that's one where, would I do it again if it was paid and I was working at the college? Yes, because that was like the ideal situation. But I would not necessarily advise that somebody else does it if I knew the path that I was going to take after it.
Gotcha. So,
and it did really, I do have to give it credit in terms of my next few jobs were absolutely because I had an MBA. It is very important depending on the job you're going for. And so it did prove to set me apart in certain situations.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. But I really like what you said about how it's the elimination process, basically, that gets you where you are. And you learn, nope. Ah, yes.
Yeah.
So after your MBA, can you just kind of lead us to where you went after that?
Yeah. So this is where this post that you mentioned before kind of comes in, because we just read Girl Boss, and she talks about job promiscuity. And I'm just like, that was kind of me. Not nearly on her level. But out of Fisher, I got a job with an e-learning company in Rochester that had like deep roots. It was started by two RIT guys in the 80s. Fantastic company. I was there for 6 weeks and they got bought out. So in my 8th week there, I got laid off. My entire team except one person got laid off. Now so I had only
like a lack of foresight.
Right. It literally came out of the blue. It was a Friday morning. We were in a team meeting and we see all these people walking along the path outside. We're like, that's weird. We don't recognize any of them. And it's a big group of them. They walk in. 20 minutes later, we all get called into a huge conference room. Company's been bought out. You'll find out next Friday if you still have a job. So it was, I mean, I don't think anybody believed it. Like, we all just kind of looked at each other like, this isn't happening. There's no way this is real. And now I had only been there for 6 weeks. So I felt kind of like an imposter. Like, I can't be that upset about this. There are people that have been here for 18 to 30 years.
Which makes sense. On the other side, you're like, but I've only been here 6 weeks. Like, how did you put me through this whole process? And 6 weeks later, you're like, no,
yeah,
thank you, but no, thank you.
Yeah. So I think that afternoon we actually had a pretty firm idea that we would be let go. But it wasn't until, a week later where it was official. But the blessing there was that I did get a severance, which again, I had massive imposter syndrome about, because I was like, how am I getting a severance? I've only been here for 6 weeks. And that was literally just state law. They had laid off 500 people. So state says you have to pay a certain amount of time because you're sending all these people out into the job force.
Right.
So that was kind of a blessing because I was in the thick of my hardest semester for my MBA. So I actually took the next 2 months off after that just to finish those classes and look for a job to set myself up for January. So I landed a job in about December. And again, this was definitely an MBA connection. The CEO of the company actually sat on the board for the MBA program that I was a part of. I had never met him personally, but because I was going for my Fisher MBA, that definitely set me apart. So I took this job. I was there for 6 weeks. Again.
No way. Are you serious?
But this was my choice.
Okay. You're like 6 weeks. That's enough.
Yes.
Done my part.
6 week increments, please.
Yeah. You've lasted more than 6 weeks for one woman shop, so that's great.
Thank you. Yeah, so basically that was just like for a million reasons I could tell you on a totally different call. It was a terrible situation, not a fan. I knew I was never going to be happy there. And so during that time, I think I was there for 2 weeks before I started interviewing at other places. And so then I landed in travel and tourism, and that I stayed there for a year and a half. So, I get some props there, but, that was again, like, thanks. But that was a fantastic job. It became apparent later on in that job that it wasn't something I wanted to do forever. And again, that could be an entirely different blab. But this is why I wrote this post about all these lessons that you can learn, right? And how they can influence you. So that's where, I worked with a lot of small business owners through my position there. And I had one of them ask me one day if they could hire me for some freelance work. And that was my aha moment. Like, there's a freelance world out there. There are people that build businesses off of freelance work. To me, I had never thought of any of this before. And that's what kills me about having an MBA and not having any sense of entrepreneurship. That killed me. I was like, how did I just go through 3 years of school, upper level school, and not have any idea of entrepreneurship? So I think that's, that was my huge epiphany of I can do this. And then it's all history from there, just how I started freelancing.
So were you like, I'm going to take one client, we'll see what happens? Or you're like, I'm going to get out of this by way of freelancing?
Yeah, well, so I couldn't actually take the client. We had a very strict secondary income policy. And so we were not allowed to have another job outside of our full-time job. So that policy in itself is crap. Like, I couldn't have gotten a job at Starbucks, for 3 hours a week. There was absolutely no leniency there. So I made the contacts. I started doing a ton of research, and I said to myself, so this was like April of 2013. I said by October, so 6 months, I am going to be out of here and I'm going to launch my business with clients. So the next 6 months I worked before work for a couple hours. I worked after work, and I worked weekends, and ramped it up.
How did you put in all that time, and how did you kind of keep your sanity? Was it just knowing that there was an end goal?
I think so. That was actually one of the busiest times in my life, because I was, I had just gotten engaged in January. We were getting married in October, so I was planning a wedding. We bought a house in July of that year. Well, we bought it in June, moved in July. I was training for my first half marathon in September. I was a newly minted aunt because my brother had a baby in March. So it was like all these things going on. And I'm like, I'm going to quit my job and build a business. So I think, honestly, I am somebody that definitely thrives on having a ton of stuff to do, because it forces me to build a structure and get it done. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I did. And that's really what it became about. I knew that I was going to get up at 5:30, and I was either running or I was going to get an hour and a half of work done. I had a 45-minute commute to work, so that kind of sucked, knowing that an hour and a half of my day would be gone because of driving. But then, I went to work, I came home, and I either worked or I was doing something related to the house or the wedding. There wasn't a ton of time for relaxation. So that is the one way where I'm just like, that was not ever going to be sustainable. I knew I had October as my end date. I can keep a pace that has a lot of work, but there has to be some time for there has to be room for those days where you're just like, I can't do anything today. And I didn't have that then. It was, if it didn't get done, that was it. So that's why it definitely wasn't sustainable, but I at no point felt like I was going insane. I was sleeping the best I've ever slept. I felt the best I had ever felt, because I was running, and I'm not a runner. So, it was actually one of the best times for me, health and sanity wise.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
so you think that's just a kind of a product of that being more productive when you're busy?
Oh yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think we found this too, is, we have times where we're kind of sprinting, where like when we're working on the Solopreneur Success Bundle, and it's kind of fun. And honestly, adrenaline pushes you through. And I always relate it to like dress rehearsals. Like I used to do plays, and I would relate it to dress rehearsals where you're all tired, you're all just exhausted, but you have this adrenaline coursing through you, and you're just so excited for the final product. But I think that only works if you kind of are careful with it, or if you have an end in mind. So
yeah, and if there is no end, building in that space to have those days where you're just like, I am gonna lay on the couch and do nothing today.
So my last 3 weeks.
Hey, and it happens, still happens.
I'm back. No, so we only have a few more minutes, but I really wanted to talk a little bit about, I think we should absolutely do a separate blab on like how the full way that you and I met and how we worked together and everything. But if you can just kind of give the teaser of how you went from doing your copywriting business full time to being part of One Woman Shop.
Yeah, so it was during that research phase before I had left my full-time job that in my, I think, probably from following somebody else, I learned about Christina Roman. I was like, oh, who's this? And so I got on her email list, your email list. I'm sorry.
I don't know who you're talking to.
And I think I downloaded like a career priority sheet or something, a worksheet of some sort. But the most important thing was that you were doing like a pay what it's worth or pay what you want coaching session. And I was like, oh, this should be interesting. So I signed up for that. I don't even know what I paid, but I know it was like that feeling of, oh my gosh, is she going to think this is
yeah. Hacky girl.
And we jumped on a call, and I just came out of that. I think we were only on a call for half an hour, but I came out with this notepad that was just like full of ideas, contacts, things I needed to do. And it was just like so clear to me, right, that I needed to really get myself in motion on a few different things I hadn't thought of. So that was so impactful for me that obviously like your name stuck in my mind. So like not even a month later, you email that you're launching One Woman Shop. I'm just like, what is this? This is amazing. So from there, it was just keeping track of One Woman Shop. And then a few months later, you sent out a survey, I believe. I filled out that survey, and I've always been kind of like the overzealous, overachieving type. So I probably went a little above and beyond on the survey, giving you feedback. But then it was, I literally think I just said to you, if you ever need help with anything, I'd love to learn what you need help with. We set up a separate call. This was like May of the next year. So I had been full-time freelancing, or a full-time solopreneur, for about 6 months. And then that call really kicked things off.
We can definitely talk about this for 45 minutes, and we will. Don't you worry, friends. I mean, obviously, we could talk about this and kind of your background more. And I really wanted to touch on, like, your parents and how that influenced you and everything. I feel like we don't really have.
Yeah, I know.
I know we have a coaching session, and we both have to take a coffee break and go to the bathroom, as we do. But are there any other, like, big kind of life things that are like, wow, this, I can't get off the blab without talking about this huge life moment? No pressure.
Yeah, seriously. No, I mean, we hit a lot of the high points. So without stretching on for another hour, I think we're good.
Well, thank you. I definitely learned more about you, and
Thank you.
Things I probably feel like I should have asked earlier, but sometimes you're just like, oh, this information comes piece by piece. So it's always fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to everyone who joined and who watched, and thanks to the guys who gave us a lot of props. I was a little out of control, but we appreciate it.
Yes, and now we know we look like sisters, so that's fun.
Yeah, right? Cool. Well, thank you, everyone, and we will see you next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern to talk about our next topic, which is TBD.
TBD. Thanks, Christina.
Thanks.